Echad etzem sheyesh lav kazayis basar mibachutz. Whether, 1 second. If a bone has kazayis basar on the outside, the echad etzem she'en lav kazayis basar mibachutz, the yesh lav kazayis basar mibifnim. You might have a bone that doesn't have kazayis meat on the outside, but it has a kazayis of marrow on the inside. The makam shvira. And then there would be an isser of breaking the bone. The hatanya. And there's a baraisa to support what we just said. It says, the etzem lo shizruvo. Don't break the bone. Echad etzem sheish b'moach. Echad etzem shein b'moach. It's a bone that has marrow, even a bone that doesn't have marrow. So if it doesn't have marrow, how do you fulfill that you're supposed to eat meat? The basar shal gabi ha'etzem, or eino elo b'basar shebetoch ha'etzem. Does it refer only to meat on the outside of the bone? Or maybe it refers to meat even on the inside of the bone. So maybe the law of the Torah that you're not allowed to break a bone is only be'etzem shein b'moach, a bone that doesn't have marrow, where there's no point in breaking the bone. What are you breaking the bone for? There's no marrow on the inside. But maybe the din would be that if you're talking about a bone that has marrow, you're allowed to break it and eat it because that's the only way to get at it. And va'alti tama. And don't be surprised about such a halacha. Shaharei yavo asay v'yitchalos asay. The asay of eating meat of a korban pesach will come to override the love of breaking a bone. So, so in the psukim that give us the laws of Pesach Sheni, it also says don't break a bone. And Shein Talmud Loimar, I don't need it to be written. Sharei Kvar Nemar, in the laws of Pesach Sheni, it already said Chukasa Pesach Yasuoso. You have to follow the same rules for Pesach Sheni as Pesach Rishon. Well, one of the rules of Pesach Rishon is don't break the bones. So I know the din of don't break the bones from the pasuk of Chukasa Pesach Yasuoso. So why did the Torah have to superfluously write Etzem lo yishruvo by Pesach Sheni? And for the Gemara Hevi Oimer, Echad etzem sheyesh bo moach, the echad etzem she'ein bo moach. The lav, don't think that the lav, the negative prohibition of breaking a bone, has anything to do with having marrow inside. It has nothing to do with marrow inside. The prohibition of breaking a bone applies to a bone that has marrow on the inside and applies to a bone that doesn't have marrow on the inside. So the Gemara says, Meisvei, I'll ask you a kasha. Aver sheyotza miktsasa. You have a korban Pesach, and one of the limbs of the korban Pesach was transported outside the Azara, but not the whole limb, like half of the leg ended up outside. So what do? Choitech ad mekom shemagia le'etzem. So what you do is you cut the meat. You figure where did the leg go in, and where did the legs remain inside, where the leg goes outside. In that place, you use a knife and you cut until you get to the bone, shemagia le'etzem, and then kolev. You peel back the meat ad shemagia leperek, until you get to the closest joint. So for example, if you're below the knee joint, you peel back the meat until the knee joint. Or if you're in the middle of the thigh, you peel back the meat until the hip joint, and only then choitech, because there you can detach the limb without cutting a bone. So you're able to, and therefore you save the rest of the korban Pesach. Just the part that extended outside the azor is prohibited to eat. And through this process, you save the majority of the Korban Pesach to be eaten. Now, what's the meisvei? Because iyamrid aver she'ein alav kazayis basar b'makom zeh v'yesh b'makom acher ein bo mishum shvirsa etzem. If you're going to tell me that, like you tried to say, that a bone that at the place where you're breaking it, there's no kazayis basar, but further on down the limb there is kazayis basar, there's no law of shviras etzem, so then lama li dekoy leifach megillah perach v'choytev? Why did you have this strange law that you have to peel back the meat until the joint? Niklov be portiv and ispirate. Just peel back a little bit and break it right there, because you're telling me there's no lav of shviras etzem if there's no kazayis basar there. Abaya Omar. Technically, me'ikar adin, you'd be able to do that. But we make gzeira mishum poka. We're concerned that if you do it, the whole bone will break. Or Ravina Omar Bekulius. Ravina says we're talking about the thigh bone, where there's a lot of marrow, and therefore it's not enough. By peeling back the meat, the outer meat, you have a problem with the inner meat as well, because there's marrow on the inner meat. And that would be prohibited to eat, because you can't eat the stuff until the joint. It's not awesome. We learn in a different Mishnah. Hapigul va'noiser va'tome. You have a korban where when they shechted the korban, the kohen had in mind to do the zrika tomorrow. So that creates that the animal is got a psul called pigul. And if you eat a kazayas of such a basar, you get kores. Then noiser. Noiser is a korban that was left over till the morning. Tameh is a korban that became contaminated with tumah. Even though minat Torah, these psulim have no din tumah, Chazal created a gzeira mitamin asayadayim, that whoever touches pigul noiser the tameh, that you become tameh as well, which is not meikar adin, it's a gzeira. Now the question is, why did Chazal institute such a gzeira? Rav Huna Rav Chizda, Chadam b'nei Chazdei Kahuna. The Chazal were concerned that there were Kohanim that would have they hated some Jew who was bringing their korban. So on purpose, they would be befagel their korban to ruin it. So in order to prevent that from happening, Chazal made a gzeira that if the Kohen made pigul, he becomes tameh. And a Kohen who becomes tameh can't do the avoda. So the Kohanim would not want to do that. So it was an attempt to prevent the Kohanim from willy-nilly making pigul. Chadam ibnei atzlei kahuna. The other Mandomer says no, because they wanted to punish Kohanim that were lazy, because laziness led to noiser. They didn't keep track of the korban that it should be eaten, and they ended up with noiser. So, if you're going to have noiser, if you touch noiser, you can become tameh. Kohanim would avoid allowing korbanos to be nifsal through the problem of noiser. Right? Mar masni apigul. Right? That's chazdei kahuna, because you do that b'mezid. Umar masni noiser. The other one gave the reason for noiser. Man de masni apigul mishum chazdei kahuna, because pigul is made through a volitional act by the kohen. Man de masni noiser mishum atzlei kahuna. That's because of laziness. Now, they also argued in the amount of meat that had to be on the limb of this pigul noiser v'tomei to contaminate you. Mar masni kazayas. One mandomer said all you need is a kazayas. Umar masni kabetza. The other mandomer said no, you need an egg worth of meat. Mandamasni kazayas ki isuro, because the isra achila is kazayas. So he said, as long as you have enough for isra achila of these items, whether it's pigul noiser v'tomei, that would be enough to contaminate the coin, the tumas yadayim. Mandamasni kabetza kitumaso. Why betza? Because you need at least a kabetza worth of meat in order for it to be infected with tumah. There's no tumas oichlin unless there's at least a kabetza worth of meat. So that's the machloikas between those manda omrim, whether it's kazayis or tumah. Iboilu, we asked the following theoretical question. Yotze, if a limb, we talked about pigul noiser v'tomei, that Chachami made a gzeira that if you touch them, you become tomei. Well, what about if a korban was nifsal through the psul of Yotze? It was taken out of the Azora. Gozu Rabbanan Tuma Olo. Did Chazal make a gzeira of Tumas Yadayim in that case or not? Mi Amrina Noiser de Gozru Tuma de Osile Atzlube. Why did Chazal make and lo mafkileb yadayim lo? It has nothing to do with laziness. If somebody took it out, then it and if he didn't, and if for example biyadayim b'mezid, fine. But if lo mafkileb yadayim, maybe lo gazu be rabbanim etuma. If the aver just happened to go out without necessarily him doing it, he didn't do a ma'isa to passel it. Maybe the chachamim were not goizer tuma. Odem oloishna. Or perhaps we'll say, no, they make no difference. We don't care whether it was done biyadayim, not biyadayim. It's a low plug, and we make exer tuma no matter what. So that's our question. So Torshma. So come in here a proof. Aver sheyotza miktsasa. A limb partially was taken out of the azor. So we said, you cut the meat until you get down to the bone. The kola, if you peel back perek, until you get to the closest joint. And you cut there, because that way you're not breaking any bone. However, if you're correct that the Chacham made a gzeira of Tumah even by Yotze, so kichatech le'mahavi. I mean, how does this help? Hai kamatamale. Chazal made a gzeira that the whole thing is Tomei. You didn't save anything. Oh, and for the Gemara, Tumas storim he. The Tumas storim lo metamya. This is a new concept. The Tumah is the connecting point where you cut the limb. So this is Tumah hidden. It's a hidden Tumah. And a hidden Tumah are not metame. Okay. Now, Ul Ravina, the Omar Chibure Oichlin Lav Chiburu. But according to Ravina, who says that connecting points regarding food is not considered a connecting point. Ukeman de Mafarti Domi. And they're viewed as if they're completely separate from each other. So then there's no Tumah Storim. It's not a hidden Tumah. And then the whole thing is Tameh. Then L'chora, they could not be Goizer. It's a proof that they're not Goizer Tumah by Yoitze, right? Ma'ikla Meimar. Ha Kanogi Badadi V'komet Tameh. They're touching each other and the whole thing becomes Tameh. Ella, so the Gemara has to learn like this. Leman Demasni Kazayis. According to the Manda Omer that says you have to have at least a kazayas basar on the limb in order to have this gzeira. We're talking about a case to less be kazayas. That's why there's no problem with the whole thing becoming tamei. There was no kazayas. Uman demasi kabeya, also the less like kabetza. There was no kabetza according to that mandomer that says that there would only be tum if there's a kabetza. Toshma, I'll bring you another proof. So there was a subscription group A. 10 people in group A subscribe to eat the Korban Pesach. And then there's group B, 10 other people who subscribe to a different Korban Pesach. Now, if the pasuk says, "B'vayis echad yeachel," you shall eat the Korban Pesach in one house. Therefore, if you remove a B'sar Pesach from one group to another, so Afal Pishuhu below Sosei, so you violated a lav. But the Baraisa says, nevertheless, Tohor. The Korban Pesach remains Tohor. Now, my lav, Tohor, the Osir, that means it's Tohor, but you're prohibited to eat it. Like it sort of was removed from its mechitza. The Gemara wants to analogize the case of shechting the Korban Pesach in the Azara and removing one of the limbs from the Azara to the outside, where we know that that's a psul. The Gemara's Havamin here is that going from group A to group B is also taking the Korban Pesach out of its mechitza. And even though it might be tar, it's usher to eat. The yotze mechavur lechavura is ki yotze chutz l'mchitzasu dami, umifsel. We compare it or analogize it to a case of a Korban Pesach that was also removed from the Azara. Yet the proof in the pudding here is it's tar, it's not tamei, right? We asked the question, we started the sugya by saying, Pigel noiser v'tamei, Chazal made a gzeira that if you touch them, they become tamei. Well, what about another invalidation called yotze? When you remove it from the Azara, does that meat become tamei or not? So the Gemara wants to prove from here that taking it from group A to group B is yotze from mechitzaso, and yet it remains tahor. Al maloikos of Rabban Tuma. From here we seem to learn that the Chachamim do not make a gzeira of Tuma. What says low? Can't prove from here.
But it was during it was in the Azor all the time when they
No. The shechita of the Korban Pesach is in the Azor.
Right, but then they put it.
They brought it home.
I understand the whole thing. So how can it get?
No. So the Havamin of the Gemara, of the Gemara is if I'm in the Feinblum house and I go and take the meat from the Feinblum house and I go to the Agatstein house on McCadden.
Because it has to be a different chabura.
So there's a lav. There's a lav because it says b'vayis echad yachel lo sotzi min abayis chutza li'ish zar. It says you can't take it out of the house that it was designated to eat. So the Gemara here wants to say that when I removed it from Feinblum's house, it's like a limb that was shechted in the Azar that was taken outside of the Azar.
I hear what you said.
So the Gemara rejects that. That was the Havamim. And the Gemara wanted to prove it's Tahor. So the Gemara says it's not correct.
Are you allowed to hedge your bet? Are you allowed to become a member in two chaburas?
No.
You're not?
No.
Okay.
Ish b'mechsas nefashos tachosu alaseh. No, you couldn't do that. You couldn't do that.
Just because if anything happens to that one say, so you're sunk.
Okay.
I just want to know if I can hedge my bets on the Korban.
No, you can't. But Walt doesn't make a difference. If at night that Pesach became Tomei, you would be potter from Pesach Sheni because they already the shchit and the zrika was done in the afternoon. Everything was fine. Now you're supposed to eat it. But if later on we learned that halacha, if later on it became
I remember that. Okay.
Your Pesach, you're potter from Pesach Sheni. You're a Makayim, what you have to be Makayim.
The Torah, the Gemara talks only about that one piece that belongs to that one individual. but the rest of the chabur, that does no problem. It doesn't affect the rest of the chabur.
No,
It's just
absolutely.
this one piece. Yeah.
The person who took it out,
Right.
he's chayiv in that lav. It's not a general prohibition to the group. Absolutely. Right. That's you have to get hasra. They have to say if by taking it out you're going to get malchus. It has to be. It's an individual isser. So and for the Gemara lo tahor umutter. This is not they're mutter to eat it, and therefore this is not a good analogy. The yotze mechavur lechavura is lav ki yotze chutz mechitzos adami. Walter's correct. The Gemara only had a havamina like that, but really the Gemara ends up saying it's not analogous to a case of taking it out of the azara. The lo mivsul. Break the Gemara. How can you say that? The haktani seifa. The seifa of that very beraisa says, "Ha'ochlo hareze below sase." Whoever eats it, it violated a law. Now, bishma lamandama kabetza, right? You could say that according to the one who says you need, in order to have tumah, it's got to be at least a kabetza, but you get the lav with the kazayas, so the ispe kazayas, the lespe kabetza, right? It's tahor because it didn't reach the size of a kabetza, but you get the malchus because you ate a kazayas. However, elamanda amar kazayas, but the one who said that you become tameh even if there's only kazayas of meat on the limb, then it can't be mutter v'tor. It's going to be mutter v'tameh. Michael and Meimar. Ella. So the Gemara is stuck and says, "B'yoytze b'Pesach lo meboy lo meboy lon deloy gazrabanim tuma." There's no shaila by the psul of Yotze by Korban Pesach. The Chachamim were not goyzer tuma. My time of b'nei chabur is reasoning umazir the yirbe. There's no purpose in the gzeira because the b'nei chabura were very careful. Like Walter said, we're going to end up not being Yotze the achil of Korban Pesach, so we better be careful. You see, the Chachamim had a reason why by Pigel Noiser V'Tomei they made the Gzeira, because there were reasons. The Kohen wants to make problems for his friend, the Yisrael, who he doesn't like. He's going to be Mafagel the Korban. Or they're lazy and they're going to end up Noiser. But here there's no purpose because the Bnei Chabur generally were Zoris. Forget about the Korban Pesach. Korban Pesach has a special din, like we learned about subscription, you got to be very careful with it. There's no reason to be goizer tumah. However, what about other kodshim? A chatas, an osham, a korban shlomim, a korban olah. If those limbs of those korbanos are removed, were chachanim goizer tumah by the psul of Yotze? Teiku. We don't, it's tishbi yitoretz. It's left as a suffix. And halacha by Pesach is loy goizer. Okay. Umotzi psar Pesach mechaver lachavor minayin. So this halacha that we just touched on tonight of taking meat from group A to group B, from Feinblum's house to Agatstein's house, where do we see this halacha? The Tanya. It says, Lo sotzi min abayis min abasar chutza. You shouldn't take meat out from the house that it was designated to eat in outside. Okay. Fine. What if there are two chaburas eating in the same house? Let's say my family, let's say the Feinblum family is eating in Walter's dining room, and they invite my family to eat in the backyard. And my family's out there. We're in the same house, or let's say in the living room. We're in the same bias, but in a different room. What if someone leaves from Feinblum's group and joins my group? The lav is even in that case. Means it doesn't have to be physically removed from the house. Going from chabura to chabura is enough, and you get the lav of malchus.
He paskins that you have to put it down there. You can't just, if you pick it up and...
Hang on. Walter's jumping the gun. He's anticipating the next Gemara. Amravami. Hamotzi psar Pesach mechavur lechavura Eino chayiv ad shianiach. Like Walter said, you need an akira and a hanacha. What is this like? Like lechas Shabbos, like carrying on Shabbos, like we learned, to carry from outside and from Rishus HaYachid to Rishus HaRabim. I need to have an akira in Rishus HaYachid. I got to pick it up in Rishus HaYachid, and I have to place it down in Rishus HaRabim. If I only do an akira and I don't do an hanacha, I'm not chayiv by Shabbos. Similarly, by this lav of going from one group to another group, I have to be maniach it in the new group. Because hotzok siv beit kashabes. It says the word lo totzi min abayis, and that's the same language used by Shabbos. So ma Shabbos ad ovid akira v'anacha af hachanami ad ovid akira v'anacha. So same din here. You need an akira and a hanacha.
But the Gemara is it's a big chiddush here because it means that a chabura is a reshut b'fnei atzmo. That's what it is. That's what it's telling you. It's a big chiddush. Where do we see that basically that can be considered as a reshut?
It's not a reshut.
Okay.
It's
It
learning.
is a reshut because the minute if you put it down, it's considered. If you didn't put it down, it's not. So you can walk over and say, hello, how are you, with your stick of flesh in your hand, and then walk back to your chabura.
Unless we paskin that hanacha means if you come to rest while walking. So if you continued walking.
Doesn't seem so from the Gemara.
Yeah, we'll see. We learned in Shabbos that there's a mandama that holds that if you walk and come to rest, even though you don't place it down, that's already considered hanacha. But in a chanami, if you come and visit my group and you continued walking and then you go back to your group, according to this halacha, you would not be. You're right.
You would not be considered. You would not be considered. It wouldn't be an issue. But that's a big chiddush that a chabura is considered a reshut.
They learn it out from chutz.
From Shabbos, I understand.
But it's learned it out from like a hekesh from the word chutz. Just like over there, you need akira and hanacha. Here also you need akira hanacha. You need the act of hanacha. It doesn't necessarily create a new reshus, but you need the act of akira v'hanacha. So Masif Rav Abba Bar Mamo, hayu soivlin oisoy b'moitois. Let's say they were schlepping a korban pesach that were tied to a stick, and they're going from one place to another. Harishoinim. This is a different halacha. This is a halacha regarding you're supposed to eat the korban pesach within the walls of Yerushalayim. Now, let's say a group is walking with their korban pesach tied to a stick, and the people walking in the head, yotzu chutz l'choymes hazorah. They left the walls. Okay, this has to do with the chatas hapnimios, hanisrofois, that the par helem dover shel tzibur, if Gans Klal Yisrael committed an aveira because Bezdin paskined improperly, so one of the par manisrofim is the par that the Sanhedrin has to bring is called par helem dover shel tzibur. It has to be burnt inside the azor. Now, let's say they were dragging it, and the front people have left the area of the Azara. So Harishonim metabim begodim. So the beginning people already become tamei. The achronim ein metabim begodim. The people that are still in the Azara, they do not become tamei. Now, the Gemara is saying, yet here it happened in V'haloi Nach. They're walking. The people in the front didn't come to a rest. Why should it be considered kiyotze if there was no hanacha? So who mosif love, who mafark love, big nigrorim, because they didn't lift it from the ground, they dragged it, and therefore it's considered there's already a hanacha there. Okay, and by the way, the halacha is like Walter said, you do get malchus if you go from one chabura to chabura. But you're not chayiv until you put it down. You need an akira v'anacha like the din of Shabbos. Okay, Mishnah. Aver sheyotzu miktsasoi. This is the Mishnah of the case we quoted earlier on tonight. You have a limb that was partly taken out of the Azora. We said you cut down to the bone. The koile, if you peel back, and then you go to the closest upper joint, that way you can detach the limb without cutting through the bone. Cutting through the bone is a lav. We don't want to do that. Now, that's the lav of Shviras Etzem is only by the Korban Pesach. So therefore, Uvimugdoshin, by other Korbanos, Achatis and Asha, Meshlamim, any other Korban, and one of the limbs was taken partially out, Koitzitz Bekupitz. You take a cleaving knife and you cut it where it is. You don't have to waste all that extra meat because there's no din of breaking the bone. You go right through the bone. She'ein bo mishum shviras ha'etzem. Because by other kochim, there's no lav of shviras ha'etzem. So the question is, now, what is considered inside the Azora versus outside the Azora when it comes to the space of the doorway? So, mina agaf v'lifnim. So you have the inside clearly. Look at your door, right? You have the inside, you have the outside. What about the door space? So the Mishnah says from the agaf v'lifnim, the space within the door's frame itself is considered like lifnim. Therefore, if you dragged something and it's only in the door space, you haven't taken it outside. Then it says, mina agaf v'lachutz kilachutz. Now, that seems to be contradictory. And then it seems to say, from the space to the outside is like the outside. So the Gemara will have to resolve this stira. Now, window space and the thickness of the wall as you're going through the gate is considered kilifnim. So first of all, here comes a halacha that's very pertinent to Zoom. By the way, we got the COVID Servum Rabbanon volumes. I'm going to be distributing that Mirz Hashem when I get home. Then I heard there's a volume 7 which continues Yoreh Deah Hilchas Nida. So I'm trying to find out whether that's been printed and ready to be shipped to us. That may be ready as well. So we might get both of them. So I don't know yet. I haven't gotten an email from Aaron Strite. Now, based on the halacha we're going to learn now, this is pertinent to Zoom and Minyan. The din is that if one of the person of the Minyan is standing outside of the room, he's not mitzaref to the Minyan. And what the Gemara is saying is, if a person is standing in the door space, if it's considered like the outside, he would already be considered like he's not part of the minyan, because the halacha is, Sarech sheyu call this, I'm quoting from the Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Siman Nun Hey, Seif Yud Gimel. Kol hasora amitzarfen lemin b'mokom echad. V'ha'omed b'chalal ha'petach, if someone of that 10 is standing in the door frame, we're talking about with an open door, but he's in the door frame, dino ke'omen b'bachutz, the halach is he's standing outside and there's no minyan.
It even applies with 2 connecting rooms.
However, Rashi says, if he's standing in the frame, he's mitzaref. So that's
Ernie,
yes.
that applies to like 2 connecting rooms also.
Well, I understand. Why can't you cancel tomorrow?
No, tomorrow's Snow Valley. That's good.
But I'm saying if Snow Valley is good, then we can cancel. They like Snow Valley. We can do that on Monday as well. But if the weather is good tomorrow, why are they going to worry about Monday?
It's 45 minutes in driving in fog.
But who says it's going to be fog?
There's fog in the morning. And they don't want to drive 45 minutes. You're in the middle of a
Okay, in a chanami. Let me. 1 second.
Ernie, again.
If you're outside the doorway, even if the door is open, it's considered like you're outside, and
That's
you're not
even
constructed the mean.
But if you have 2 connecting rooms, is that outside means outside in the air, or can it mean 2 connecting rooms in the house?
No, we're talking about outside. You have a door to the outside.
So it doesn't apply this halacha necessarily if you have two connecting rooms and you have some of the minyan is in one room and some of the minyan is in the other room.
I'm not gonna comment on that at this point. This halacha is referring to a room with a door to the outside. So, and the door's open, but the person who's standing outside the Pesach is considered like he's not mitzvah to the minyan. That's all we know now. Your question is a different question. We'll have to get to it when we get to it. We know by, Johnny, I will answer you that by minyan, you are mitzaref, as long as you can see the other diners. Not only that, even if you're around like a 90-degree angle and there's a waiter that serves, let's say you have 5 in one group and 4 in another group, and the waiter goes back and forth, you can be mitzaref even if they don't see each other, but the waiter's mitzaref them. That's by minyan. That's by mezumin, you know, and that din. Whether that applies to minyan as well, I don't know offhand, because the only halacha here I have that is being quoted, we're going to get to that sugya, certainly when we learn Tzurva Rabbana. And I believe in the same house, if you have 2 adjoining rooms and they all see each other, you're not considered outside. Everybody's considered inside.
Yeah. Okay.
Now,
no, because
but Johnny,
yeah.
If think about your dining room and your living room, like in your house, you got a big wide opening. There's no door there. However, let's say you had 2 rooms which were closed by a door, you know, so there certainly, if the doors were closed, they would not be mitzaref. And I would have a shaila whether even if you have the doors open, that would be considered. If you had 9 in one place and 1 in the other, that may also not be considered the same thing. Because a bias and being outside and a bias in another room with a door probably has the same halacha. But I wouldn't say that for certain at this point. But l'chora, that probably has the same din. So you see, this din of minyan is a real. There's some people who hold that by Zoom, if you have 10 people in a room and they're saying Kaddish and you're watching by Zoom, you can answer Amen because the 10 are there. But to create a minyan over Zoom when the 10 people are not physically in the same place, that's where the normative halacha says it's not a minyan. Yes, we learned in Tzvika Shir that there are yechidei poskim who've said yes, but that's not normative right now. At least everything that I've learned has said that it's not normative. But if you have 10 in one place and you hear via Zoom, there are many poskim that say you can answer Amen. There's still poskim that say you can't answer Amen if there's 10 in a room who are there and you're listening by Zoom. Upligid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. Rabbi Shua ben Levi, afilu mechitza shel barzayin amal sex bein Yisrael avim shabbat shamayim. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says that even if a wall, walls don't separate between a minyan. We don't paskin like Rav Yoshua ben Levi. But regarding birchas kohanim, if there's a wall between the kohanim and the people, that's okay. It doesn't ruin the bracha. So if the kohanim are behind a wall, and when they bench the people, l'chora, that works because of this halacha of Rabbi Shua ben Levi. So now we get to the internal contradiction we said in the Mishnah. Agufa kasha amrit min agaf lifnim kilifnim. You said from the agaf to the inside like the so agaf atzmo kilachutz. That seems to imply that the door space itself would be like outside. Aim and safe. I mean agaf lachutz kilachutz. Well, the door space the outside is like that. So agaf atzmo kilifnim. So you can't have it both ways. Lo kasha kan b'shari azara. So when it comes to the azara of the Beis Hamikdash, there the door space or the space separating between the azara and what comes next, that's considered like the inside. But when you're leaving the walls of Yerushalayim and you're walking through the gates, once you're in the airspace of the gates, you're already considered like you're outside. That was done on purpose. The gates of Yerushalayim were left purposely not niskadesh. Now, a metzora have to be kicked out of all three machanois, right? Tumas Meis can go into Machna Levia, can be in Yerushalayim. A metzora cannot stay in Yerushalayim; he has to be kicked out. Now, let's say it's hot or it's rainy. The metzora could stand under the gates of Yerushalayim because it's and be protected from the sun or the rain, because on purpose they left that and those wall gates, those gates and the door going into Yerushalayim were very thick, so they had a fair area to gather to protect themselves from the environment. Now, Shar Nicanor was the open gate into the Azora in the front, but you have many other gates. Now, that gate on purpose was left non-sanctified. Part of the Tahara process for a Mitzorah was they had to stick their big thumb in, and the Kohanim would apply the blood of the Tziporim on their thumb. Well, in order to do it, they had to stand in that space. So they purposely left that gate alone unsanctified. But all the other gates into the Azora were sanctified. So that's a raya that the space between the gates are also Kedushas Azora. Then the Mishnah said, the windows and the thickness of the wall were treated like the inside of the Azor. Amarav. But Gagin va'aliyos lo niskachu. The roofs of the Beis HaMikdash and the Azora and the balconies were not miskadesh. So the second stories were not sanctified. And the roofs in Yerushalayim do not have the din of Yerushalayim. Freik the Gemara Eini. That can't be correct. To describe the enthusiasm with which Klal Yisrael sang Hallel on Pesach, that even if they were eating a Korban Pesach for 100 people, the size of a kazayas, they sang Hallel with such enthusiasm that they broke the roofs. Now, the Gemara understands that, my love, the achli be'igra va'amri be'igra, that they were eating the Korban Pesach on the roofs, and they sang Hallel so hard that they broke the roofs. Well, you remember, the Korban Pesach has to be eaten where? In Yerushalayim. Well, we just said the roofs of Yerushalayim do not have Kedusha of Yerushalayim. How could they eat the Korban Pesach on the roofs? So we'll leave that with a kasha. So we said we're going to learn tomorrow night also at 7:30 p.m., half an hour before the Navi Shir.